Hey Squishies, welcome back to another vlog. This is going to be something a little bit different. Uh, as of when I'm recording this, Steven Universe has not had new episodes in a while. DuckTales just came back from its inter-season hiatus, and I wanted to build up a few before I start vlogging it. So I put it to my Patreons. What did they want me to do? Did they want me to just do a lot of Star Versus? Did they want me to watch another show? People made suggestions. I put the ones I liked best into a poll, and what won was old school propaganda cartoons, which is an interesting one to say the least. I'm really looking forward to doing it. There's a lot of different things I could do. But the thing that comes immediately to mind when you say, to me, old school propaganda cartoons, is World War II and Donald Duck. So that's what I'm covering today. I'm going to be talking about 4 cartoons from the period 1942 to 1944. They're all Donald Duck cartoons. They're all about 7 to 10 minutes long, and they are The New Spirit, The Spirit of 43, Der Fuhrer Space, and Commando Duck. So let's jump in and get started with The New Spirit and The Spirit of 43, which are essentially, I don't know if I'd call it a series. The Spirit of 43 is in essence a sequel to and remake of The New Spirit. They're both talking about taxes. They're on the delightfully phrased theme of pay your taxes to beat the Axis. Which is a great line. That is, I think, one of the best slogans that propaganda has ever come up with. Basically what happened was, during World War II, taxes were raised, taxes on high earners were raised a lot. The tax base was expanded. So more people who had in the past been exempt from income tax now had to pay it. And there was, there was a lot of taxation going on. And by and large, Americans do not like paying their taxes. That is a problem that has long been with us. There's a certain irony to it, though, in the sense that that cry of no taxation without representation that we associate with the Revolutionary War, the reason the British raised taxes on the colonies was because there had just been a very expensive war against the French to protect the same colonies. Or more accurately, the American end of the 7-Year War. It was a very expensive war for Britain. It was fought by a lot of different combatants on multiple continents, which was kind of a new thing at the time, a multi-continental war, and it was very expensive. So the British raised their taxes, and a bunch of slave owners and smugglers were like, fuck no. And so they made their own country and wrote their own constitution, and that's where we come from. Yay! I mean, that's the abbreviated version. I left out all the genocide. And I only mentioned the slave owners, not all the slaves, and oh my god, people are messaging me. That's terrible, and I apologize. Anyway, so there's an irony to the government saying, pay your taxes so that we can fight this war on another continent, is my point. But that had to be sold to people, and by all accounts, Disney's cartoons were actually highly effective. If I remember correctly, polls from the time said that something like a third of the population cited these two cartoons as a factor in their decision to pay their taxes. That's some pretty damn effective propaganda. The second half of both is identical. So I'll talk about that kind of separately. And that's why I talk about them as being kind of sequel, kind of remake. The earlier one, The New Spirit, from 1942, it shows Donald dancing to this, like, updated World War II version of Yankee Doodle. And then the announcer starts this whole, on the radio, starts this whole spiel, basically getting Donald all worked up about, he's super patriotic and he wants to do something to help his country. And then the announcer says, so you can pay your taxes. And Donald's basically like, Eventually he's convinced to do it, and then it's an advertisement for the simplified 1040A, which is very funny to me because by the time I started paying my taxes, 1040A was the standard one, and 1040EZ was the simplified one because things had gotten so complex, even the simplified form needed a simplified form. And I should be clear here, I'm being a little cynical about this because I'm generally cynical about propaganda, but, there are much worse ideas than, heavily taxing the rich. Heavily taxing the poor. To a degree, taxes are a kludge to allow society to continue to function under capitalism without degenerating into corporate feudalism. But it's better than not having a kludge for that. Anyway, the equivalent part in the second one is actually a lot more fun and interesting. Depicts Donald getting paid, and then two halves of his personality fighting over him, kind of like shoulder devil, shoulder angel thing. But it's a version of him that's a little Gladstone Gander-y, but has the Donald voice. Actually, it doesn't have Donald's voice. It has this very, slick, shyster kind of a voice. Not Gladstone Gander at all. But it's trying to get him to spend his money. And this, the other version of him, the Shoulder Angel equivalent, is a Scottish version of him that's trying to get him to save his money so that he can pay taxes with it. And it's actually kind of weird to see because the Scottish version of him looks and talks and acts astoundingly like Scrooge, who would not be created for another 4 years. Because he was created in 47, and the Spirit of 43 was created in obviously 43. I'm really curious as to the connection between the two. Did Karl Barks go back to this old design and reuse it? Is it just a coincidence? I don't actually know. This is a place where my duck knowledge is failing me. But it's kind of hilarious to imagine a proto-Uncle Scrooge arguing that you need to save your money so that you can pay taxes, which for someone as arch-libertarian as the 80s version of Scrooge is just unthinkable. Anyway, eventually it's revealed that the version trying to get him to spend his money is, you know, a Nazi. And he goes and pays his taxes, and then it goes into the second half, which like I said is the same between both cartoons. And this is, to me, I think actually the most interesting but hardest to watch part of anything that I watched today. Because it's this narrator talking about all the things that the taxes will be spent on, and it starts with him saying guns, guns, guns in this almost orgasmic tone. Like, oh my god, guns. And he's talking about all these weapons that will be used in the war, being built as a result of the taxes. And it's like, I mean, don't get me wrong, you know, World War II is quite, like, the Allied side of World War II is quite possibly the most justified war in history. There absolutely was a need to fight the Axis, and World War II really is the unbeatable counter-argument to strict pacifism. But it's still disturbing the degree to which it doesn't matter who is being fought against, and I'll talk about that a little more in Der Fuhrer Space. But, like, the fetishization of the weapons, the enthusiasm for destroying an enemy who is utterly demonized, which again, demonizing Nazis doesn't take much effort. They're basically there already, but what's disturbing is that this kind of propaganda, usually not so blatantly, but this kind of, you know, yay, weapons, and we'll use them to defeat the evil, is very, very common in later conflicts that are not remotely as black and white. So it's unsettling to see. It's also a little saddening, the degree to which your money will be used to kill people is a persuasive argument for getting people to pay their taxes, where it will save lives, by and large, isn't. Americans seem, to this day, to be much more willing to have their taxes go to violence than to have their taxes go to, you know, feeding people or medicine. Anyway, I've talked a lot about those two. Let's talk about Der Fuhrer Space, which is probably the most famous of the cartoons I just watched. It's the one where it opens with, there's this song running through the whole thing that's like a parody of a, it's more or less a silly song that's meant to make fun of not any specific Nazi song, I don't think, but it's making fun of Nazis. But it's a song that's being put in the mouths of Nazis. That's the best way I can put it. And Donald is depicted as a Nazi, as a factory worker in Nazi Germany, who is a loyal Nazi. And he's shown eating this ridiculous meal of canned scent of bacon and eggs, rock hard stale bread, and coffee made from a single bean. It's clearly depicting life under Nazi rule as being characterized by hunger, by poor food, and there's constant blaring propaganda everywhere about, worship the Fuhrer and all that kind of stuff, as he goes to work in a factory making shells and gets overwhelmed by the amount of work being demanded of him and gets this 30-second break that's described as a vacation, and then forced to work overtime, and finally breaks down in frustration, and then wakes to find that, to his relief, that he's an American, and it was just a nightmare. Which again, I am not remotely going to suggest that life under Nazi rule was good, because it wasn't at all. For the overwhelming majority of people, it was awful. It was really only there was the upper crust that did quite well in Nazi rule because they were the Nazis ruling. But, for the majority of people, even the ones who weren't being hunted and murdered and put into camps, it was terrible. But at the same time, two things that jump out at me. One is there was rationing for the Allies in World War II as well. And, having to work long hours in a factory and getting little to no vacation and having to work overtime whether you want to or not, as if that's never been forced on Americans before and since. And it's telling to me the degree to which this depiction of life under Nazi rule is indistinguishable from pop culture depictions over the latter half of the 20th century of what life was like in the Soviet Union. That they literally just took Nazis, filed the serial numbers off, and reissued the depictions as communists. And this, of course, would then happen again in the early 2000s when they filed the numbers off communists and re-released the depictions as terrorists. It's a pattern that Americans like to depict. First of all, we like to have an enemy that can be depicted as pure evil, and we like to depict evil in ways that are weirdly similar to how a lot of us actually already live. It's a strange phenomenon, but it's something that recurs in American propaganda, and I'm sure we'll see it again as I go through more propaganda cartoons in the future. And then there's the last cartoon, Commando Duck. It's this one is more of a story. It shows Donald as a paratrooper going on this mission to destroy a Japanese air base, or airfield. It's mostly a kind of typical Donald Duck cartoon. The military angle is a little less common, but him getting, him pulling the instruction booklet out while he's parachuting, getting caught in the trees, the ridiculous sight gag of him stopping right before he hits the crocodiles and zipping their teeth together. It's all very cartoony in a way that there wasn't so much of in the other cartoons. But then the Japanese show up, and it takes a hard turn into jaw-dropping racism. That is, of course, a common thing from depictions of the Japanese in that period and for quite a while after. But I can't imagine what it would be like to be a Japanese person in the US at that time, and not only being herded into camps, but seeing this horrifying image of yourself as this buck-tooth caricature who, ends every sentence with please and, always shoots in the back first. It's fucked up. And there's a real glee in its hatred of the Japanese that I think is part of what's disturbing about the guns segment of the two Spirit cartoons, is this sense of the enemy is evil, so we can finally unleash all this horrifying stuff that's in our collective national psyche. The racial hatred, the love of violence, all of that can be... We finally have an excuse for it. And now we can revel in it. It's a little disturbing. And I don't think that's the last time I'm going to be a little disturbed by what I see in propaganda cartoons, especially as I start getting into ones that are for maybe less good causes than fighting Nazis. Because, it's hard to imagine a better use of propaganda than encouraging people to help fight the Nazis. But if there's that much darkness to be found in that, I can't imagine how much worse it'll be when I start looking at propaganda cartoons when we were less, obviously, the less bad guys. But we'll see how that goes in future videos. For now, I think that's about it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Check out my Patreon for early access to vlogs, essays, let's plays, and more. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!